So now let's take some of these numbers and classify them. First number we have is 17. Now, number 17, first thing we ask ourselves, can I count to 17, or do I have 17 items in my room? And the answer is yes. So this 17 is a natural number. It is a counting number. But as mentioned before, is if it goes into here, it can actually fall down into the whole numbers. So it is actually a whole number. And it can actually fall down into the integer cone. So it happens to be an integer. And it also falls into the rational number. And it also happens to be a real number. And I'll give you a little bit of a hint. All the numbers that we're going to be talking about today are real numbers. Okay? Let me zoom out just a little bit so we can read everything on there. All right, let's look at another number. Okay, so we're going to classify this one here as a natural number. All right. 7.83 repeating. Now, if we look around, we can't count to 7.83 repeating. We just don't count naturally like that. And it's not the number 0, so it's not a whole number. And it's not a negative of our integers, of our natural numbers, so it's not an integer. But it is a decimal that repeats. So a decimal that either terminates or repeats. So here's a decimal that repeats. So this here happens to be a rational number. But it will, if it goes into rational, it will go through that funnel and into the real number funnel. So it happens to be rational and real. So we'll take this guy here and we'll put it over here at rational. Now, we have the number 0. Can I count to 0? No, usually if I say, hey, what do I have in my hand? Well, I'm going to what do I have in my hand? We don't say I have 0 in my hand. We just usually say I have nothing in my hand. So we don't count to 0. But as we notice, 0 happens to be a whole number. So 0 is a whole number. But if it goes into the whole number funnel, it'll fall through into the integer. And it will fall through into the rational, and which will make it fall through into the real numbers. So this is a whole number, an integer, a rational number, and a real number. Now the square root of 8. When we say square root, we say what number times itself is equal to 8. Now I know some of you say, oh, I know, it's 2 times 4. But 2 and 4 are not the same number, so that doesn't work. And you can try the other, 1 times 8. That doesn't work. If we don't have a number that multiplies, is a product of a number that multiplied to itself, then this happens to be an irrational number. It cannot be written as a fraction. But your irrational numbers will fall down into your real numbers. So square root of 8 happens to be irrational and real. Now I have 0.875, or known as 875 thousandths. I don't count to that, so it's not a natural number. It is not the number 0, so it's not a whole number. It's not a negative of my natural numbers. But it is a decimal that terminates, decimal form that terminates. So this happens to be rational. But again, if it falls into rational, it'll go all the way through rational into the reals. So this happens to fall into that same category. Let me move that up a little bit farther. There we go. Now, pi. I don't count to pi. It's not a 0. It's not a negative of my natural numbers. Can I write this as a decimal? Well, the answer is no, because if we look here, it is an irrational number. Pi is one of those irrational numbers, so it is irrational. and real. Because again, if it goes into the irrational, it'll fall down into the real numbers. Now the last number we have, or last two numbers, we have negative square root of 25. So what times itself gives you 25? And you'll say, well, that's 5 times 5, and you would be correct. And so that would be a negative 5. So that negative 5, if we write that negative 5 on there, we don't count to negative 5, so it's not a natural number. It's not 0, but it does have a negative of our natural numbers. Here's 5 as a natural number, and I put a negative in front of it, so this happens to be an integer. Again, if it falls it down into the integer, it'll go through rational and down into real. So now I can take this one here off and put it here. I'll move this one here up. And our last number, though, is 1/9. I don't count to 1/9. It's not 0. It's not a negative of my natural numbers, but it is a fraction. So this is a rational number and a real number. So I can place that by my rational numbers here. Whoops. I guess I'll put it right there so you can see it.